Good morning. Please welcome Senior Director, Strategy and Analytics at Slack, Neil Shah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here at Frontiers in New York City. I hope everyone had a chance to catch the keynotes this morning. And I was really excited to hear a little bit more about the customer stories. Always love being inspired by them. Hope it inspires some of you all in the audience as well. We'll weave those in throughout the whole day today. What we'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about today is how good enough isn't good enough anymore. If we think about the experience that employees have within organizations around the software and applications and tools that they use, we find that it's becoming more of a determining factor on overall employee engagement. And if we think about some of the most valuable resources and assets that we have within our companies, it really is our employees. And if we think about that overall life cycle and how we drive engagement and how we drive overall retention of those individuals, we need to be thinking more about the technology choices that we make. And so we'll have a chance today to explore some of the challenges and the trends that we see within the workforce. We'll get an opportunity to dig into this a little bit deeper with one of our guests from the Washington Post. And we'll wrap that up with some takeaways and some best practices that you'll be able to take back to your organizations. So to introduce myself a little bit more formally, my name is Neil Shah. I lead the strategy and analytics team. I've been at Slack for just under 3 years. As a part of that, I've had an opportunity to work with many IT decision makers and software decision makers through our executive briefing centers. I spend time with our analysts, also with our investors and how they think through evolving trends and investment decisions. Prior to that, I spent 5 years consulting with McKinsey. I had an opportunity to dig into large change management programs, not always for software, but a lot of those best practices carry forward in how you think about mobilizing a workforce and really finding ROI through some of the decisions and change management programs that we do. And we'll weave that in as well today. We know that the workforce is evolving. More than a third of the workforce today are millennials. And outside of the age of employees or average years of experience, what this really deals with is the evolving demands that the new workforce has within organizations today. The expectations they have when they walk into a new company, an existing company, and even when they're evaluating organizations. We hear from 93% of them that they have an expectation for up-to-date technology. This no longer is an option, but it's a requirement for all of us. And what that translates into is 42% of them saying that they would consider leaving an employer based on substandard technology. If we think about ourselves as consumers of technology outside of the workplace, we have an expectation and an experience of immediate access to information. We're used to smartphones and the most up-to-date technology, applications that are solving for individual use cases that we have, multiple solutions. All of that pace of innovation and speed that's happening outside of the workforce is translating into the workforce today. And people are walking into their employers with that same expectation and those same demands. And so let's rewind to better understand how we got to where we are today. If we look back 20 years ago, Microsoft Excel, and still today probably one of the most comprehensive tools that exist out there, really did solve for everything within a single place. Individually, as a piece of software, you were able to manage your contacts as a CRM tool. You were able to navigate complex projects as a project management tool. You were able to do budgeting and forecasting, keep track of identities and passwords, figure out how to manage or measure the effectiveness of a marketing campaign. Today, every single one of those individual use cases in and of itself has become an entire category of software. And within every single one of those categories, there's now an emerging group of solutions that solves for more minute pain points within that individual category. So you can think about CRM, you can think about task management, you can think about identity. And so what does that look like today? It looks more like something like this. And we see this plethora of solutions across every single category. And what we find within our organizations is not just a single one of these solutions in a category, but more often than not, we find multiple of these solutions within every single category. Because end users have this expectation that they're able to use the piece of software that they feel most comfortable with. And the acquisition of that software has become even easier. Cloud as a delivery mechanism has allowed us to be able to get these onto our devices, onto our laptops. SaaS as a business model has made it really easy for managers to just be able to expense this out. And so all of that collectively within the emerging demands and evolving kind of expectations of employees and the ease of acquisition of software has made organizations look more like this. And so is this new? Well, it's new for applications, but it's not necessarily new over the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen this happening with devices. The concept of BYOD, bring your own device into an organization. If we look back when smartphones started, it was more common than not to see IT-centric BlackBerry devices being deployed across the organization. Devices that solved for a select few individuals and decision makers within organizations with an experience that was good enough for employees. It did and accomplished the basic functionality. But if we look today at employees when they walk into organizations, they have an expectation that they're able to use the device they feel most comfortable with. It doesn't matter what the operating system is. It doesn't matter who the device manufacturer is. It can be their iPhone. It can be their Android. But they walk in with knowing that IT departments are able to support each of those. And that's translated into what we've heard referred to as BYOA, bring your own application. And individual employees walking into organizations, thinking about the applications that they've used in their prior jobs, thinking about the ones where they may know the developers, ones where they may have heard about the individual use cases and feel really comfortable with it. And so let me give you an example of how I've seen this manifest within Slack and one of the teams that I work on. And so as a part of the strategy and analytics charter, I work pretty closely across many of our data teams. And I'm working on a fairly complex project right now across 4 different functional data teams, from data engineering, our data model team, our business intelligence team, our analytics team. And so we work with our program management team, who really helps keep us on track. And as a part of that, as an organization, even for program management, we use multiple different pieces of software. We use Smartsheets at times, we use Trello, we use Jira. This individual program manager, who's really responsible for keeping us on track, is using a piece of project management software that doesn't have a name right now. It's still in alpha/beta mode. They know the developers, but they used it at their prior company. They know any time that they have an individual kind of need or use case, something that they're not fulfilling, they'll reach directly out to the developer and say, hey, can you solve this for me? And it allows them to be really effective, and the project is running incredibly successful. Now, imagine if we told that individual that we would remove that from them, and they weren't allowed to use that piece of software because it wasn't sanctioned or it wasn't part of the approved listed devices within that organization. It'd be jarring for that employee, and it would affect their employee experience. Because to them, it's not about what is formally approved. It's about what they feel most comfortable using, and it allows them to get the job done, and it allows the project to move on efficiently. And we're seeing that translate across all different pieces of software. And so as a result of that, if we look at Slack, we use over 350 different pieces of software. And we are just over 1,000 employees as an organization. I imagine that many of you here today probably work for companies that are an order of magnitude, or sometimes even 2 orders of magnitude, larger than Slack. And the number of software solutions you use within your organization is probably a multiple of this. Netscope came out and said that the average enterprise company uses over 1,000 different pieces of cloud software within organizations. And so to realize the value of all these different solutions, we know that adoption of that software is absolutely critical. And historically, there's been barriers to adoption of software. We know cost has always been a barrier. We know that there's been opposition from stakeholders when you're rolling out software. On top of that, if we think about going forward, we believe that that continues to evolve, and embracing user choice is something that we have to take into account when we think about what that software looks like. Paul Donnelly said, people told us they would quit if we took away their Slack. Now, I love the fact that this talks about Slack. This is a Slack conference, and it's really fortunate. But this abstracts out of that. If we take this on the slightly more macro sense, this really is about software decision making. And this really is about how employees feel when they think about the tools that they use and they feel most comfortable with. And so we'd like to spend a little bit of time digging into that further and really thinking about how we push past those challenges. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Brenna, Head of Talent Management and Employer Branding, up to stage from the Washington Post. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Let's start a little bit. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I'm Brenna Child, Head of Talent Management and Employer Branding at the Post. In short, because nobody really understands what that means, but in short, I everything culture related at the Washington Post, everything internal communications, as well as talent acquisition. So recruiting and sourcing, all of that is under my purview.
Excellent. And you think about employee experience quite a bit.
Yes, it's critical. Employee experience is critical for the Washington Post. I mean, really for any company, right? But especially for the Post at this time, because it is, we're going through a large transformation, or we've been going through a large transformation, right? And so during that time, a lot of change happens, because with transformation comes change. And if you don't have a good employee experience, or your employee engagement is low, it's difficult to bring your employees along with you on that journey. And so we think about it every day.
Yeah, and this has been something that you've looked to codify within the organization as well. Tell us a little bit about how you've actually codified and what that means and translates for you.
Sure. I think, at the end of the day, if you think about what's the best recipe for success and for employee experience and engagement, we look at it in three ways. We look at it: communication, collaboration, and technology. So what can you do within those three areas to increase the employee experience or increase engagement? And so that's kind of what we looked at. From the communications perspective, we said, what behaviors do we need in the organization in order to increase that engagement? And so in that perspective, we needed more innovation. So one of our three behaviors that we looked to kind of infuse into the organization was shape ideas. That was one of our catalysts for change. And so that meant, how can we increase experimentation throughout the company? Are people thinking big and inventing the future? Are they thinking of the next thing? Along with that is redefine speed. So are people allowed to work quickly, or is it too bureaucratic? Are they able to reach the people they need to? Are they flexible, and can they turn on a dime, and do they sense the urgency? We want to make sure that that's the employee experience. And then third is take ownership. So are we really empowering our employees in regards to everything, in their job, in their communications, in their technology? Are we empowering them to really get their work done, to get the best work done? And along those lines, and then what kind of technology then what technology can we adapt that will allow us to infuse those in the organization?
Excellent. And if you look back, as you've said, you've been going through this transformation over a period of time. 4 or 5 years ago, the organization was different.
Very.
Right? Outside of the acquisition itself, just the culture of it. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen that transition over the past 4 to 5 years, what it looked like then, what it looks like now. Yeah,
it was interesting. 5 years ago, I think, the Washington Post was still progressive, but it was hard to see. There wasn't, we were known as a publisher, not the media and tech company that we are today. So our journalism was great, our advertising was great, but newspapers were in trouble, and we were moving more towards the digital space. But now we've created this software product that we sell to other content providers. So we're powering other websites. And so it's a whole new kind of business model. And so 5 years ago, that didn't exist. And now all of a sudden, we need to be this product-centric organization that moves quickly and innovates every day. And so it's less bureaucratic than it used to be. Like I said, it's much faster. There's more transparency, the collaboration. There's more collaboration across units. As you were talking about earlier, it's very important to be able to, when you're working in these groups on a project, you've got to work with everyone in the organization on different levels. And so we've seen a massive shift in the culture.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so as you've thought through and navigated that shift, you've focused a lot on this employee experience, and you focused a lot on how you bring them into that fold. I can imagine that it felt uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you've navigated that. What are some of the challenges that you faced, and how have you worked towards solving those?
Yeah, so a favorite person of mine has always said, when it comes to like your development or an organization's development, that if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. And I'm finding that to be true. But when you're looking at empowering employees, you get a lot of things that are uncomfortable. You get a lot of ideas. You get a lot more ideas. You have a lot more to manage. You have a lot of people speaking up. You have a lot of people saying, I want this, I want that, I want this. So this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. And so it's hard. But that's also amazing, and that's the only way that you can grow, and you can do it quickly. The more diverse ideas you have, the more voices you have, the more you listen to those voices and help them and support them instead of stifle them, I think the more successful you can be as a company.
Yeah. And as you look towards hearing many of those voices, I think Washington Post has taken a unique approach where we know that we're seeing many of these solutions exist in organizations. We don't want to limit them, but we also have to find a balance with how many different pieces of software we use, right? And so it sounds like Washington Post, from what you've described, has taken an approach which allows both kind of bottoms-up innovation, employee voice to be heard, while also trying to reconcile and empower kind of best-of-breed software to exist within companies. And tell us a little bit about how you've managed that. How have you done that?
Yeah, it's a fine line. I think, you know, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of tools come through our doors. People will use them and throw them out, or they'll use them, there's some adoption, but then it really doesn't grow. And we've kind of watched that, and we let it happen organically because we think that's important. Because if our employees are using something and it's helping them succeed, why stop them, right? And so we either help fuel it or we let it go, depending. And I think that's a fine line, and you have to really watch that. But a few went through our doors, collaboration tools, and then they left, and one came back, and then they left. And then Slack came along, which was useful, and not just because this is a Slack conference. We actually do like using Slack. But you know, it came along, and it really did pick up momentum. And so it started to fit the mold of what we needed. And so that's when the company then stepped in to say, all right, let's get a bunch of people together in a room, and let's talk about what we're using. So a focus group of sorts. Let's talk about what we're using and why. And why is it working for you? And how can we make it better? So how can we make it even more efficient? We don't want to stop it. We don't want to step on it. We don't want to make things less organic. But can we make it easier for you somehow? And so amplifying that adoption in that way was really useful, but we involved and we used their voices in order to do that.
And how do you think about these focus groups? Because I think that is a more emerging way of organizations to approach this. How do you figure out who's a part of these focus groups? How often do they meet? What role do they play? What level of influence do they have within the decisions?
It's a pretty strong level of influence, I have to say. But it really depends on the product. So, for example, our Workday, when we implemented Workday, that was very different. We knew it was easier to identify who needed to be in the room, right? Because who were the end users going to be and who are the stakeholders? It's a little bit more easy to identify. With Slack, it can be the whole company, right? With something like a collaboration tool, so you don't really know. However, you do have your influencers, and you can see them. You can see who's using Slack, who's pushing Slack, which departments do you think we could roll out to next? So if you're not just thinking who's using it now, but let's think progressively, and who can we add in so that we've already gaining some traction there and some buy-in. Making sure there's different levels in the room. Right? We can't just have one level in that room. You have to hear from all different departments at all different levels. So that was really critical.
Yeah, finding those influencers is something that we hear more and more from organizations, where when we think about adoption, when we think about engagement, we think about rollout, to really realize ROI of different software decisions, finding ways to amplify that message through existing employees versus top-down messaging. And it sounds like a lot of finding these influencers. Are there other ways in which you've found kind of using influencers to amplify that message? So we have these focus groups. You talked to me a little bit about how they represent themselves in channels, how you really try to kind of use them to roll out software.
Yeah, it's a bit more organic. I think in just inviting them to those focus groups, and then a lot of times, I mean, it sounds so simple, but a lot of times just saying, who would you invite? It's a pretty basic question, but who would you invite? And then I think there's a few channels that down the road we started to roll out, and really going up to them directly and saying, will you help? And this is how we'd like you to help. If that's, we don't want you, we're not going to tell you what to say, that's for sure. We believe in like authenticity and transparency. And so that would be against everything we stand for. But it is helpful to say, will you help? So I think that's really it. And how influencers help is going to be different based on every company.
Yeah. And if you think about, so going back to the rollout of Slack, just as an example, feel free to use a different piece of software as well. You talked a little bit about this organic adoption and then a little bit of the intervention to kind of come in and help amplify what that message looks like. How have you seen the rollout of Slack at Washington Post over the course of the last few years?
Slow and organic. I think it all started in engineering, right? They needed something. They knew we were moving fast before we knew we were moving fast. And so they're in it on a daily basis. And they're like, wow, we're developing this software. What is this? I thought we were a publisher, and we're not anymore. And I need to talk to this person over there, and I can't. And so they struggled. And so they themselves went out and got something. They didn't wait for the company to do something for them, which was great news. And so it was very organic, and it picked up steam very quickly. Which is why it caught our attention. And so that was it, but it wasn't the employees saying, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And that's what we found really important, and I would hope that others would find this important, is that you have to actually listen. So it's not, they're not going to always come to you and say, can I? You really have to pay attention and keep your ear to the ground and say, what's really happening? And are we accidentally stifling them, or are we supporting them in the way we need to so that we can be successful? And really listening to what they're doing. And we did that with Slack, and we hadn't done that in the past.
Yeah.
So, there were definitely failures that we learned from to say, yeah, we did not listen. And then we went and we implemented a technology, and nobody adopted it. And
how do you listen when you say we listen? What are tactics or mechanisms that you found to be successful that maybe others in the audience can use and take back to their organizations as well? So
we open channels of communication. So we used to have an idea channel. That was very helpful, not just on Slack, but before Slack, we had an email for an ideas kind of thing, which was really old school now that we think about that. But that was years ago. And I think that in keeping your ear to the ground, you're basically, when they come to HR is not known for adopting technology, right? We're just not. But when you have somebody from engineering and you're working with them and they're like, oh, hey, are you on Slack? No, I'm not. Just email me. That's the wrong answer, right? You say, okay, I'm going to meet you where you are, because from an HR perspective, everyone in the organization is my client. So I want to meet my clients where they are. What are they using? We adopt it, and we say, okay, how are we using this? How are other people using that? And then you really listen. You look at the channels. You read. You just pay attention. It's kind of it's just kindness in a way, and good manners. But pay attention to the organization, and really, it's just opening your eyes.
Yeah, and that feels like it took an element of a culture shift, even within the company.
Yep.
As you've thought about it.
Yeah, the more people really took hold of it, and the transparency came down, and silos just broke immediately, because all of a sudden you've got somebody at the lowest level reaching out to the executives, and it was comfortable, right? Because nowadays people are more used to discussing things and behind a screen, which is a good and bad thing, right? So we do at the Post try to bring that out, and we do try to get together as a group. Not just use collaboration tools, but then also meet face to face. But yeah, it broke down a lot of those silos, and it was very helpful.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about collaboration tools, communication. You lead your internal comms team, and so as a part of that rollout. But this extends to software decision making outside of just collaboration tools as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think. One of the ways in which, we talked about really listening to the employee, and then we talked about trying to step in and then maybe put a little bit of structure into all of those tools. But really key to that is kind of wrapping it up, is saying, how can we connect all of those tools together? Not just collaboration tools, but even like Workday, for example, our HRIS system. You want to be able to connect that back to support it. So just like integrated marketing, integrated technology can support each other. So your technology becomes stronger if you have other technology leading back to it and supporting it. And so that's really key to our strategy, especially in internal comms, because from a communications and tech perspective, you really have to connect everything in the organization.
That's right.
Whether it's AdPoint, ServiceNow, our HRIS, Slack, whatever it may be, we have to be pointing back to each other.
Right, and it's finding that balance between how do you connect all those different pieces of software while allowing employees to be able to use what they feel most comfortable with, what is the one that solves the use cases for them, what allows that to kind of flourish, but also kind of maximizing that overall ecosystem of software decision making.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point actually, because I think you can drive the narrative, right? You can try to get people excited about using something if they're already using it. If they've already embraced it, you can kind of push that forward a little bit and give it some more momentum. But the day that it starts to fail, we can't be, as leaders, we can't say, but this is what we want, and this is what we did, and we've been doing it, so just keep doing it. We can't say that. We really have to be able to pivot. I think that's really critical, that to say, like, you know, and we've done that with our HRIS, because we like Workday, we're working on it, but it's like, whoa, wait, that's not working. Shift that. Not change products immediately, but let's shift that. How do we make that better for our users? So I think pivoting is another thing that is pretty critical, which leaders are not always good at.
Yeah. Are there examples of times when you've tried to roll something out and you've realized that it wasn't the right decision? You've decided to roll back. How did that feel? How did you navigate that experience?
Sure, we did. We created well, we've done that a few times. I think that we've learned a lot from it in the past. You know, gosh, I've been there too many years. We definitely had a product that we created. It was a video interviewing tool that we created in-house. And we did have a focus group and a group of people that really were going to use the product. They helped develop it. They helped create it. They were in it. But at the end of the day, it didn't do what we really wanted it to do. The technology did, but it didn't give us the results we were hoping for. And so we did go back as a focus group and say, why? What did we do? Or were we just looking for results that didn't exist? Like, how can we change the product? And we iterated, and we went back, and we went back. And then finally, as a group, we said, should we be focusing elsewhere? And should we just kill it? And we did. And so it was a year's worth of work, I would say. And it was a good experiment. And that's one of the things, that's one of our behaviors we wanted to put into the organization anyway, right? Experiment, fail, keep going. And so that was really important for us. And so we did move on to another product similar that would help us solve some of the same problems. And that's worked much better.
Yeah, I think as a large part of this, we're realizing how important adoption and engagement is as a part of the rollout, as a part of success of software. And so as we think about rolling out or making decisions, we need to be thinking through the full life cycle of what that product looks like and really kind of driving that. So we'll open it up in just a minute for questions, and so we want folks to start thinking through that. I think there's going to be 1 or 2 folks walking around with microphones. So they've got the light blue shirts on, and so feel free. And so I guess I'll just leave it as any kind of last thoughts or advice before we open it up to Q&A from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most important, I think that we've talked about, is really listening to the employees and making certain that we are, from an IT perspective and from a leadership perspective, communications, we're here to support them, and we're here to support the company's growth and their objectives. So what can we do to help those employees feel the most successful and the most empowered? And I think that's the most critical.
Absolutely. Any questions? I see a couple on this side over here.
Hi. Sorry. For teams not on HR or IT, people operations, they have a lot of different priorities, from security to hiring. So when you're another team on marketing or engineering, how do you partner with HR or IT to say we want this product, or we want this software?
Yeah, and that's critical, actually. If you don't have those good partnerships, it is difficult to get things done. What department are you in? Are you in a marketing department? Yes. Okay, all right. So I think depending on what kind of product it is, but a lot of times it's really learning to navigate the organization. So who do you think? Who do you think in another organization could help you, so that you need to look at the organizational charts and say, I think that person might be interested in what I have to say, and just have a chat. That's the first thing. You just have to sit down and have a chat. Say, I think this is really help. These are the struggles we're having in my department, and I found this, and I just think it might be worth trying. Maybe we could pilot it. Do you know who else we might talk to and partner with to maybe help us do that? I know that's how a lot of organic things have started at the Post. And does that answer your question? Yes. Okay.
Thanks for your presentation. I guess the question that I had, and it's kind of tied to the response that you just gave, is how do you overcome skepticism towards new technologies? Obviously, when there is organic growth for new technologies, sometimes excitement about those new technologies isn't consistent across the organization. So, for example, in adopting Slack, you might find in various parts of the organization, some teams see value in it initially, and other teams have a little bit more of a barrier to overcome. From your experience, how have you overcome some of that inertia within Washington Post?
Yeah, that's a great one, and you probably have a lot to say about this as well. I was going to say, I think first you have to have champions. That's critical. There are going to be departments that will be more difficult to kind of get on board. But in my experience, not just technology, but almost anything you're going to roll out at a company, you need to know why you're doing it. You need to have a clear vision. So even if you're using it at the bottom level, I don't care where you are in the organization, if you're using it, you need to understand, why is this helping me succeed? And not just that, but then tie it back to, and why does that then help the company succeed? So you really do have to have a strong vision. And I think that's where I'm coming from. That's probably the best. Departments, again, in partnering and navigating the organization is really critical. I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've seen is, what are the pain points that individuals are facing? What are the individual use cases that it solves? And so this could be Slack, but it could be another piece of software. Different functional teams have different needs, and they use it in different ways. And so understanding what those behaviors are in the beginning and really building that case for change before you try to roll out that system is something that we found to be really important. And so the way sales teams versus customer support teams versus product marketing teams or product development teams use Slack is very different. And if you try to just use a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, then it often struggles. And so I think that's where partnering with comms teams, people teams, and really their experience and how they've navigated that is something that we found to be really important. Time for probably 2 more questions. I see one just over here.
And I'll stick around as well. And
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So thank you for the amazing presentation. So we have a bit of an issue at the company we work at where we're growing very rapidly, kind of like you guys, about the same size. And there's this like wealth of tools out there that people love to use, but they've all got a bit of a gray area overlap of the features that they have. So we got like Team A that loves this tool, Team B that loves that tool. And so like, a new employee joins the company and they're like, oh, what do I use? Like, so, like we're trying to do things in a diplomatic way and trying to say, hey, like this is the ecosystem of tools. But kind of keen to get some input from you guys on like, how do you justify one over the other? And do you allow everything? Which at some point becomes a bit overwhelming. So, cool.
We've been there, for sure. And we do not allow everything. So one of the ways in which we solved that was taking that focus group approach. Okay, so at one point in time, whoever is going to be the owner of it, whether it's IT, internal comms, marketing, HR, whatever that group is, it should be all of you. But if the lead, wherever you are, should bring a bunch of people together in a room and really start. I mean, go back to like the requirements days, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve, and what requirements do we need in order to get there? Go with use cases, go with user stories, right? And really walk through it in that sense. I don't think, because at the end of the day, you're going to find a lot of conversation on it. You're going to have to go back 3 or 4 or 5 times with that group because you're going to hear, well, why are you using that? Why are you using that? Okay, and then I do think that sometime, and again, I don't know the organization. Every organization has a different culture and kind of way of decision making. But if you then, like we chose, we are going to step in now and we're going to help Slack's momentum. When you start adding momentum to one, the others start to dissipate. And so I think that's important. I don't think we can say yes to all, but we're not going to say no to all either. But when you do start putting the, some power behind one, it does help. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Excellent. I apologize. We have actually run out of time. We'll be.
Please, please.
I know. Oh. We'll do it quick. Yes.
A different slant. So Slack is awesome for encouraging transparency, but also then to get the business value out of this, we need to do social listening in those channels and applying analytics. So how are you balancing the need to do social analytics, to do sentiment analysis and other things to show where your company is going in terms of culture and other aspects with being transparent and not hindering people from actually sharing what they're feeling?
Oof, that's a tough question to answer in like 2 seconds. That's a really good question. We should probably talk afterwards. We do listen. We don't put a damper on anything people are saying. We do listen in the background. I have an internal communication specialist who unfortunately is in the other room right now. She's great. She could probably speak to this much, much better. But we make certain to be looking at who's using which channels, how many channels. If there are issues, we go directly to the person themselves and we discuss those. But I'm not sure if that really answered your question, but we don't tell anyone what to say or not to say, even at a media company.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
it. And just wrapping up quickly, and then I think there's a lot more sessions, and so we'll give folks. We heard very clearly, right? Listen to your employees. We know that's a critical part of all of these rollouts. Amplify current adoption. A little bit of what Brenna talked about was it's not about making the selection and limiting choice overall, but finding the tool that solves for those needs, allowing that kind of breadth and taking that kind of bottoms-up approach, but then helping intervene in a very methodical but slowly adopted way to really help kind of amplify what is the technology that fits the needs of the organization. And then overall, how do you drive value by connecting technology? And so thinking more about that overall ecosystem approach. And so with that, thank you very much. Thanks for being a great audience, and thank you all for the questions.